Sensationally silver, because you are.
Welcome, everyone, to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind. Conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. People who are going to bring you information, inspiration, and validation. Join us. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind. Conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. My guest today is Wayne Lehrer. He has written a book on conscious aging. I don't know what this is about, and I can't wait for him to tell me and to tell you, all of you as well. So, Wayne, welcome to Sensationally Silver.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad you're my guest because I want to hear all about conscious aging. But first, I want to hear a little bit about you. Wayne, tell me your age.
73.
Okay, 73, because everybody on this program has to be 60 or over, so you qualify. And tell me, what is the best thing about being the age you are right now?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. Um, I would say that I don't have to do all the stupid things I did when I was younger.
Oh, now give more details. What does that mean?
Well, I think one of the things, and not everybody gets there when they age, but lots of life experience, if it's been well digested, turns into wisdom. And if it hasn't, it turns into a lot of regret. And I had a lot of regret as a result of a bunch of things I did in my 40s and my 50s, and I've moved well beyond that now, and the wisdom now, it's a shortcut. It means I don't have to struggle, I don't have to suffer, because I've sort of learned my lesson, and I know that it's just showing up for life and being who you are and offering your gifts and a lifetime's worth of experience, and things seem to flow more freely and fluidly.
Yeah, that is one of the gifts of aging. It's as though what you're calling mistakes or regrets, they get transformed into gifts, into our wisdom and what we can give others if they want to listen. If they're young, they may not. We didn't. They
Right.
probably won't. But at least we've got those miles on us and we've benefited from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what, Wayne, would you say is the hardest thing about being the age you are now?
I don't really, there's nothing really hard about it at this point. I've just really moved into complete acceptance. I'm not particularly hit with a bunch of challenges at the moment. There have been times in the last, since, between 60 and 73, where there were some. My brother's on the precipice of passing over, and I'm in acceptance. I just show up, I'm loving, I'm kind, I'm generous, and that's the best I can do. And knowing that that's the best I can do, which of course is one of the gifts of aging consciously, is knowing that the best you can do is the best you can do, and not coming down on myself around that. So yeah, so I'm actually extremely enthusiastic, optimistic, excited. I've found a passion that has a lot of meaning to me. I feel renewed. I don't, the things that one of the things that happens when you make the transition from what I call your second act to your third act is you really have to let go of your expectations and your thoughts about who you have been for the first 50, 60 years of your life, and come into acceptance about who you are now, the body you have, the way your brain functions now, the kinds of relationships you have, what really matters to you, where you put your attention and your energy. And once I got sort of clear about that, then life became a lot easier. And
Mm,
so, there's, uh, yeah, I'd say it's not that hard.
okay. Well, it sounds like we're leading into exactly what you've written about. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, it's pretty much what sort of drove me to it. I hit 60, and all of a sudden I was confronted with all of these issues. I went into this sort of low grade depression. And I went to a therapist who was a gerontological therapist. And, he was dealing with me as though depression was my issue, which I thought it kind of was. And after I was with him for a couple of months, I realized that depression wasn't my issue. My issue was that I was living in a new body, in a new reality, a new work situation, and all of these things were new, and I was not in acceptance. And I've come to identify that, and I didn't know that when I started writing the book. I've called that the third act identity crisis, which is, you've built this identity in the second act of achieving, acquiring, accumulating, competing, succeeding, plus all the role models that we aspire to are all second act role models, winning, celebrity, wealth, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you hit this place where you've been downsized out of your work, your children have left home and you're have an empty nest, your body doesn't do the same things it used to be. You have to give up. In my case, it was mountain running, or in other people's case, basketball, or whatever it is. And all of a sudden a lot of the things that you've identified with yourself with are gone. And since with the way most of us in the West value ourselves is by who we are and what we've accomplished and what we've defined as those things, when those things are gone, you're left wondering who you are, and you're left oftentimes with a feeling of kind of falling short, failing, and that's sort of what motivated me. And it was this time during this time with the therapist, I realized that I was just stuck between lives. I hadn't made the transition from this second act reality to the third act what I call the third act operating system, which is cooperation, giving back, being an elder, community, sharing your gifts, living the purpose that you've spent your whole life preparing to live, as opposed to the profession that you've spent your whole life living that may not have been really on purpose for you. For some of us, it was, and for some of us, it embodied part of our purpose. But when all of those things are gone, you're kind of left without ground to stand on and a sense of self, and you have to redefine that. So that's what motivated the book. And then I started looking around and seeing that kind of everyone I knew that was in my age range was dealing with the same issue.
I can feel people who are watching and listening thinking, oh my God, that's what's happening to me. This is very profound, in my opinion, because what you're describing as that depression and that loss of identity is sort of the doorway, if I'm hearing you correctly, to desert the time where you get to do what you want to do. You get to be who you really are, not worry about somebody firing you if you show how you feel about things. And so, I mean, it's so much freedom, so much good stuff, but it can get masked by the losses, because there are definite losses and you described them well. So many of them. The body doesn't work the way it did. The career isn't what it was. The parenthood thing, that's got a sell by date. And
Yeah.
we passed that. Who am I? So let's get into, how do we find that? How do we figure that out?
Well, that's kind of what my whole book is sort of the operating manual for making that transition. And obviously, one of the first things we have to do is we have to let go of the story of who we've been, which is a real challenge because we've been working at it for 40 years actively and 50, 60 years overall, right? And every way in which we've defined ourselves was by our doingness, not necessarily by our beingness. And all of a sudden, the doingness has been either taken away, marginalized, or limited in some way, as you mentioned, health, children, whatever, all those definitions. And so, we have to look out into the world and reassess. And, so instead of it being retirement, it's really a time of reinventing, recreating, redesigning. But you can't get there until first you accept that you're in a completely different stage. This body has a expiration date, and every organ in the body has a different expiration date. Your mind doesn't function the same. It doesn't function better or worse. It just has different functionality. For example, what a lot of people think is losing your memory is just letting go of unimportant stuff so that you can focus on things that are more on a feeling tone level or emotional intelligence level as opposed to logical. And so a lot of the things we've defined ourselves as, we really have to just look at them through a new lens. So anyways, the first thing is, I have a chapter in the book called It's Not Negotiable. It's one of the first chapters in the book. And that is, when you're young, everything's negotiable. You want to stay up all night and then go to work and do a presentation to the ad council of New York City? No problem. Want to stay up 3 nights in a row and do it? No problem. Stay up an extra half an hour at 73, and you can forget about making a good presentation tomorrow, right? And those things are not negotiable anymore. So when you get to the place that you stop trying to negotiate and you come to acceptance about them, there's an incredible amount of freedom. But most people can't, because they're still judging themselves by their second act criteria and by the criteria of the world. How fast are you? How successful are you? How high do you jump? That kind of stuff.
And
So
it sounds like maybe one of the things that gets in the way is not really knowing what the issue is. That's what I hear you defining. The loss, the grieving for those losses, the acceptance of them. If you don't know that that's where your attention has to go first, you may not be able to make that jump into this other way of looking at yourself and the world. And what you said about memory, I've never thought about it that way, but I wonder if there's actually some programming in the human being that as we get older and we pass a certain age, we start only being able to open up to this other path, this incredible, beautiful, profound path that we weren't even thinking about, really.
yeah,
Going deeper into who I am.
yeah.
What's my gift to the world now? I love
And
that.
when your hard drive starts filling up, you have to decide where you're putting your attention. And so rather than see everything as a loss, it's an opportunity to just look at the world through a completely new lens. It's like Dorothy going into Oz. It's like all of a sudden you went from this black and white world to this color world. Most people think that going from the second act to the third act is going from a color world to a black and white world, which is crazy. In fact, my ability to feel and sense other people is greater. Not if I'm obsessed with myself anymore, but as I recognize that I've come here to make a contribution and I've spent my whole life preparing for it, like you've chosen to do this podcast, that came, I'm sure, out of a place of deep connection, saying, wait a second, I've got something uniquely mine to give back. I did this, and this in my life that made me a good, interest in other people, makes me a good presenter of certain information, whatever it is. And we begin to recognize ourselves. So the first thing is as I said, is we stop negotiating. We have to let go of the story. And, a lot of people, when they start making this transition, their stories get really smaller and smaller. Their life becomes medical appointments, doctor's prognosis, and their grandchildren, and maybe sports or politics. And so their world started getting smaller. And so a lot of the concept of aging has got nothing to do with anything other than your world getting smaller. Because if you look at the definition of youth, it's the world expanding, right? I mean, literally, if you look at a little kid, the thing that makes them different than an older person is one person's turning inward and their world's getting smaller, and the other one's going, what's next? What do I want to do today? Oh my God, look at that, a blade of grass and an insect.
And even the idea of what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, that changes as we're 5 years old, 10 years old, coming out of high school, coming out of college, and it may change again and again.
Right. And
Yeah.
as opposed to, oh my God, I've been doing what I wanted to do. Most people weren't doing what they want. They got railroaded into a profession because they had to earn, they had to get money for their family. They wanted to buy a house. They wanted, cars and toys and whatever it was. And so to get to the place where you actually can ask yourself, and I see most people our age saying, hey, I don't know what I want to do with my life, when I grow up at 60 or 70 years old. And I go, And it's pretty clear. I mean, one of the things I coach people one-on-one about this, about making this transition and saying, wait a second, if everything you've done in your life was ordained by a higher purpose, which was to get you to the place where you brought all your skills together, all your gifts together, all your natural predilections, the things in the world that speak to you, that matter to you, not everyone's here to be Mother Teresa or Oprah Winfrey, but everyone's here and they've prepared themselves for, I believe, a moment. It's what my first book was about, The Prodigy Within, which is discovering your life's purpose. And I don't believe most people can truly discover their life's purpose, people, until their late 40s, 50s, or 60s, because they haven't done enough of the research into the areas of who they are to perfect those things. So, I designed world's fairs and museums for a living. I've trained hundreds of yoga and meditation teachers. I was an inventor of superfoods. I've done so many. And how do all those pieces come together now that made me the perfect spokesperson for aging consciously? I didn't plan to do this consciously, but I hit a certain age and everyone in my world said, you should really write a book about aging. And it was like, and I realized, oh my God, I've prepared my entire life to do that. And I believe everybody our age has prepared their entire life to become who they are. And rather than hit the age where they say, I've reached the end and I've outlived my purpose and I'm not this thing anymore, celebrate that you're not that thing anymore, because now you can be you.
I'm remembering this film, this beautiful film that was done on Mother Teresa. And some priest said, she couldn't even keep the candles lit when she was a young novitiate. And yes, it's exactly what you're saying. We just keep building toward this coming together of our purpose. I
Yeah.
love that idea.
Well,
Okay.
if you look at someone like Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter was way more effective in his third act than he was in his second act with creating Habitat for Humanity. I mean, an enormous impact, and one of the big problems for us is that social media, the media itself, and in actual reality, there are no real role models that are really celebrated for the third act. If you look even at Art magazine, everyone they celebrate on the cover of Art is somebody who's still living second act wins. Tom Cruise, he's 57 and he still does his own stunts. I don't want to do my own stunts. I want to do something completely unique, I want to make a contribution to the world now. And I believe that's what our third act is about getting to the place where, as saging, an elder, giving back, whatever you call it, where we've been out in the world long enough, we see the problems, and we know how we're the unique solution to a singular problem. And then we apply ourselves to that. And whether it's just planting a garden, a victory garden, and inviting other people to, have a piece in that garden, or whether it's writing a book or putting together a podcast, time's now. And it's time, and it's only the elders that have enough life experience to really make a meaningful contribution to what can change things now.
When you talk about ARP and the cover personalities and so on, they're also celebrating people who are in their first and second act back then, not what they're doing now for the
Yeah.
most part. Or it's a reprise over and over again of what used to be. We're still doing concerts, still
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Okay, so you're saying, come on, let's discover what this chapter is all about.
Yeah,
This phase.
I have a friend. He was in jail for 38 years, and he was one of the few guys let out of jail he was in for murder. It was a fight that he got into at 19. And while he was in jail for that period of time, he studied law. He helped all these guys in jail write briefs. He studied the penal system, started putting together legislation. And he did so much in jail that the governor of California one of only two people, he commuted his sentence. And then when it's time for his third act at 57 years old, he was let out of jail, and he's raised $77 million from the California legislation and completely changed the penal system, because that's what his whole life prepared him to do. And he's showing up being who he'd been his whole life, but never really got to play at that level. And he's the perfect example of somebody finding a way to completely be themselves and give back and make that contribution very different than at any other time. And so the success in our third act is all about, our spiritual well-being and the contribution we make to others, as opposed to, so if you look at the first, second, and third act really simply, the first act is about dependence. The second act is about independence, and the third act is about interdependence. And a lot of people get stuck in the second act of independence, and that's what's celebrated on ARP. Still does his own stunts, playing to millions of people around whatever it is. And interdependence is what we all crave at this time, which is real connections, deeper sense of community, making a contribution, giving back, sharing our knowledge and wisdom with others, whether it's mentoring or volunteering or having created a product that can make a huge difference in others' lives.
Oh, my brain is just going in a million directions with all of this because somehow, I mean, I'm sure this discovery of purpose has been going on for a very, very long time in older people. Not in everyone, but in older people. But it is individual.
Well,
I
it
mean,
actually really hasn't, and the reason is because people never lived long enough.
oh,
So what
that
happened is you reach 60, 65. The age I am now was dead when I was a kid,
yeah,
right?
over,
Let
right?
alone I can, I still have most of my second act capabilities, let alone being younger than my 46-year-old son in spirit, you know?
Mhm.
So that's the first thing is we get an additional 20, 30, or 40 years that no one ever had before. So that's not a time to fade away and go to the Barco Lounger or just play golf all the time or go on cruises. It's saying, wait a second, we're not put here during this time for that. We've acquired all these skills that we worked on a whole lifetime. Now, the third act isn't about just acquiring more. It's about giving something back. So it actually hasn't happened till now, which is why, for example, a book like mine is so profound, I believe, which is like, we're ready finally to say, hey, I'm here to show up. My body still functions for most of us, at 60, 70, 80, 95%. My brain is functioning in entirely new ways. Emotionally, my emotional intelligence is the highest it's ever been. And spiritually, I feel connected. Those were not all things that I could say before. So now you've got 30 years to bring some real mastery to that and get to what Malcolm Gladwell calls a tipping point, where I get 10,000 hours, in my 30, 40 years to actually show mastery of whatever it is I came here and worked my whole life to develop.
When I used to teach for adult ed and for the community college, I loved the older students because they were right there listening, so interested. The young people were all being pulled back and forth by hormones. I mean, they couldn't listen. They were just in the class to get whatever they needed to get to the next stage, exactly what you're talking about. It's all about moving on and doing all this stuff. But those older students were just so precious to me because they appreciated what they were learning, and you could see that they were applying
Yeah,
it all over the place in their own
that's beautiful.
experience, plugging it in. Yeah. And the other thing that's occurring to me as we talk is that sometimes people have had a career that they haven't enjoyed, or they haven't really hit a peak that they thought they should. And they look back on those previous years, those previous stages, that previous stage particularly, and think, my life's been a failure.
Yeah,
I didn't achieve what I should have achieved.
right.
And you're saying, no, 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 no. You just need to garner what you've learned from that,
Yes.
because now there's this opening for you and you can walk through that door that's uniquely yours, right?
And you just put your finger on one of the main motivational issues that comes up that helps us make that transition from the second to the third act, is the question that a lot of us ask ourselves: in our 50s, 60s, 70s was, have I created anything of value? And, yes, I did this, and I did this, but what about, and then all of a sudden we're looking at things through that lens and we go, oh, there's more value I'm still prepared to create now. And the world needs the value that we're ready to offer it.
So we have a legacy that we can create now. It doesn't
Yes.
have to be related at all to it can be, but it doesn't have to be related to our past.
Yeah. And I don't believe, and I believe it's the outgrowth of the past. I believe it's the amalgamation and the transformation of the past, but it's a unique offering. And that unique offering has to come from first recognizing who we are and what we've brought together. Second, looking out in the world. I don't know how familiar you are with King Arthur's and the search for the Holy Grail, and he sent Parsifal off, and Parsifal was the fool, which is basically what you are at 60 years old. You're like a child again. Like, what am I here to do? And he told, and basically the whole story was he went out to find what's called the Grail, the Holy Grail, which is known as the Cup of Destiny. And when you go to the Grail Castle, he was told, don't reach out for the cup, ask the question. And the question is, what ails thee, humanity? Or another way of saying is, how may I be of service? So the thing that really distinguishes it at 60, in that transition from the second to third act is, maybe I haven't created real value. How may I be of service? And in the asking of the question, all of those diverse aspects of ourselves start to come together in a really unique new way. And a path opens out in front of us. And I'm sure you've experienced, I call it following the breadcrumbs. You don't need to know exactly where it's taking you, but you need to know, oh, I'm interested in that. I'm curious about that. I want to go to that thing. And all of a sudden the pieces fall into place. So this book I wrote 10 years ago, I was invited to teach yoga and meditation at a weekend retreat. And in that weekend, I met the dean of the top gerontology school in the world. I met the president of AARP, and I met the top fitness person in our age group of all time. So the three of the top 5 people in the world of this field. I had no plans to write this book, but the universe knew that I would, and those 3 are now 3 of my best friends in the world. I see them regularly, talk to them all the time. And that was following the breadcrumbs. And each one of us has, and in the past, we were supposed to know what we were supposed to do. And I believe now the breadcrumbs are laid out in front of us as we ask the question and then indulge in being curious again, like children, having interests that we put to sleep at 20 or 30 or 40 because we didn't have the free time, starting up hobbies again that matter to us, finding things that bring us joy and doing them just because they bring us joy, not because they're going to take us somewhere else. And all of a sudden, the breadcrumbs start appearing, and all of a sudden we start to feel this momentum, and the momentum carries us to ourselves and to our unique contribution.
I spoke to someone who was a financial expert, and she was talking about life expectancy, and she was talking about how much it's changed. And I'm not sure I've got the numbers right because I'm not very good with numbers, but it seemed to me that men were expected now to live to be something like 92 or 93 and women 97. That's a long life, way past what you were talking about that it used to be. I mean, that whole biblical thing of, 70 years and then click, the time's up. So we've got this other age. And if I'm hearing what you're saying, we've got a destiny ahead of us. It's
Yeah.
not behind us, it's
Yeah.
ahead of us. And maybe it's actually the first time we've experienced having a destiny. Maybe not, because I know my life has pulled me along with those breadcrumbs in very surprising ways I never chose consciously early on, but they've been amazing and I've outgrown them. That I
Yeah.
do not want to go back and revisit any of that. But there's this thing called, I heard it termed, I love this term. This woman referred to it as spiritual alchemy
Mm.
that takes all of that and makes something very beautiful out of it. So, you know, we're out of time, and I want to talk with you more. I want our listeners and our viewers to see more of what you have to offer. So will you be my guest again?
Oh God, that'd be great.
Because we have a lot
Love
more to
it. Yeah,
talk
this is a
about, don't
great
we?
conversation, and there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. And this is exactly why I'm doing this thing that I'm doing. I mean, this is the most exciting thing I've done in years. I learned so much from my guests, and I get to make that offering to anybody who comes and hears and listens. This is magic for us at this time in life. So, Wayne, thank you. We're going to do this again soon, okay?
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. See ya.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, is sponsored by Sensationally Silver, a complete hair care product line created especially for people with hair like ours, naturally gray and white hair. Sensationally Silver products can be found exclusively at sensationallysilver.com.
Sensationally silver.